Hey, how's everybody going? This is Ramina Zarm from Flex to Success Clinical Rehabilitation Services. I just wanted to do a quick video on borderline personality disorder. I've had a lot of encounters with this particular disorder in my career, both when I worked for a psychiatric hospital and or on a psychiatric unit within a hospital and as a therapist. Let me jump right in. It's May 12th, 2020. It is a Tuesday, and here we go. So, what is borderline personality disorder? Well, borderline personality disorder is a pervasive, persistent pattern of instability within interpersonal relationships regarding self image, affect, and marked impulsivity. Borderline personality disorder begins in early adulthood between the ages of 18 and 30, um, and it's present in a variety of contexts. There are 9 criteria total that basically encompass borderline personality disorder. I like to call it, BPD for short. So I'll probably call it BPD throughout this video. So just so you know, when I'm saying BPD, I'm talking about borderline personality disorder. The first criteria for borderline personality disorder is frantic efforts to avoid real or imagined abandonment. Um, Again, just so everyone knows, all of the information that I provide in these videos are within the DSM-5. I only like to use evidence-based material. I don't grab information from websites. So anything you hear in this video will be from the DSM-5 or my own personal experience with the condition. Um, so like I was saying, the first criteria is real or imagined abandonment. People with borderline personality disorder, they tend to have a very, very heavy focus on being abandoned. They're worried about their boyfriends, girlfriends, parents, close friends. They're worried about being fired from their jobs. They perceive anybody rejecting them as abandonment, whether it's justified or not. So even if they do something horrible and somebody abandons them for it, um, they're still going to go through just as traumatic of an experience as if it wasn't justified. So I think that's important to note um, for many reasons. One, people with BPD, they tend to have really volatile, stressful personal relationships. Um, they tend to get really messy in relationships because their moods and their affects are kind of all over the place, up and down and all around. So it's very easy for them to have conflict in their relationships, whether it be interpersonal or personal. They tend to be confrontational by nature. So it's not abnormal for somebody with BPT to have tons of drama and conflict in their life. That is a natural part of the illness, just so people know that, because there's a heavy stigma around BPD. A lot of people feel that people with BPD are like all talk and no action. About 10% of people with BPD actually do follow through with suicide, so it's not entirely true, that stigma. And as a therapist, you want to take any threats of harm or suicide extremely seriously, regardless of who it's coming from. So I just thought that was important. The next criteria for BPD is a pattern of unstable and intense interpersonal relationships. And what I mean by intense is they shift from idealization to devaluation. And what does that mean? So it's very common for somebody with BPD to put somebody on a pedestal and then start to not like them a lot. um, they tend to have very volatile labile affect. So um, one minute they can be with their partner, telling them how much they're in love with them, enjoying every second of them, telling them how they knew they were meant to be when they first met them, and then in 5 minutes, they can't stand the sight of them. And They want to be as far away from them as possible, and they feel like they made the biggest mistake in the world by being with that person. And that can happen in a matter of hours, minutes, um, very, very rapidly, to say the least. So that can be very confusing for people who are involved with somebody with BPD. So when I'm doing excuse me, it's not Corona. Um, so when I'm doing therapy with somebody with BPD, um, I like to bring in the people who are the most important to them, close family members, friends, people that they have real relationships with, because I want to make sure they're all on the same page and that there's no confusion when the client with BPD symptoms start to kick up. Um, I want to make sure that the people in their life have the opportunity to be supportive. Um, Individuals with BPD, they really thrive off of healthy relationships with strong boundaries. So, the relationships that they have formed before they come to therapy, you want to, as the therapist, help them maintain those relationships to the best of your ability. So, um, filling them in on some of the symptoms and providing psychoeducation on the actual illness is extremely helpful for family members, friends, and um, spouses. The next criteria is identity disturbance. So individuals with borderline personality disorder, they're not really entirely ever sure of who they are. Um, they never really feel fully confident um, of who they are as a person. So, for instance, like somebody with borderline personality disorder um, might, think that they are introverted. So, for like a day, they might be really inside themselves and start to mimic traits of introversion, right? And then watch a movie like with Angelina Jolie in it, and like Tomb Raider, and then all of a sudden the next day they're an extrovert and they're mimicking what they saw in the movie because they were inspired by it, and now they have totally shifted their mindset into thinking that they're an extrovert now, and that happened in a matter of 24 hours. um, so that can be really confusing to people because a lot of times the people who are friends with the person with borderline personality disorder, they can't really figure them out because they're not really sticking to any set criteria um, of personality. They're just shifting based on mood. So yeah, there's no stability in their personality, and they have no consistency in their identity. And you get the feeling when you're involved with somebody with BPD that they're kind of unstable in that regard. And you just kind of do the best to support them and hope that they eventually find themselves. But to be honest, like from my work with people with borderline personality disorder, they usually don't ever find themselves. They just continue to shift, um, from one extreme to the next. And it's not always day by day. Sometimes they can go a couple months being a particular way and then spend a couple months being a different way. Um, but it's usually erratic, and it's important to note, if you're involved with somebody with BPD, that you're not really going to be able to get a good read on who they really are. That's going to be extremely difficult because that will be constantly changing. So the next criteria is impulsivity. Um, so the DSM-5 is really clear about this. It basically states that um, there's usually impulsivity in at least two areas out of five areas. So the five areas are spending, sex, substance abuse, reckless driving, and binge eating. So out of those five, there's about two In order to have a diagnosis of borderline personality disorder, you would have to have impulsivity in at least two of those areas. Um, it's very common for people with borderline personality disorder to have bulimia. Um, that's common. It's common for them to have a lot of tickets for reckless driving, speeding, you know, ridiculous tickets like, 130 and a 85. But, I mean, not just one ticket. Like, some of us like might have made a bad mistake. Maybe we were, you know, uh, driving a friend's car. He had a really fancy car. We wanted to see how fast it could go. We just happened to be an unlucky day with a cop that was just waiting for us to do that so he could pull us over. No, the person with borderline personality disorder who has impulsivity in the driving area, they will probably have a slew of violations and their license will be revoked, and this will be ongoing throughout the lifespan, unfortunately. So, it's important to note the difference in, somebody who, makes a mistake here and there and somebody with a borderline personality disorder. It's an extreme difference, and you'll notice a heavy uptick in speeding violations if it is reckless driving. Substance abuse, it's mostly binge use. They will go from binging to being in recovery, then to binging again. Chronic relapse is very common with people who have borderline personality disorder that are impulsive in the area of substance use. Spending and sex is pretty self explanatory. Of course, it would be on the excessive side mostly. The next criteria is recurrent suicidal behavior, gestures, threats, self mutilation. So, again, it's people with borderline personality disorder, they tend to suffer from something called intense episodic dysphoria. Dysphoria is an extreme feeling of dissatisfaction or unhappiness. And episodic just means like occasionally with no, you know, standard time interval. So there's a lot of irregularity in that. You never know when somebody with borderline is going to have an extreme drop in their mood. There's no subtle cues. Um, they don't kind of like build themselves up to it. It's just like a crash. So you can be sitting outside on your patio, having tea with them, laughing, um, everything's hysterical, and then all of a sudden they're crying, and you're like, what did I say? What happened? Where is this coming from? It's coming from them. They had a drop in their mood. It just shifted, it just happened. They had no control over it, and they're going to go through that. And it's best to just kind of step back and let them go through it and just be supportive as needed. Um, when you're dealing with somebody with borderline personality disorder, there's two things that you want to be mindful of. One is to be supportive, and two is to have strong boundaries, because you don't want the person with borderline personality disorder to walk all over you. They tend to be extremely manipulative, and if they sense weakness, they will try to exploit it. So you want to have strong boundaries in place, and you want to be supportive at the same time. And it's a give and take, and it usually takes practice to become um, to kind of gain insight into how you can do that in a balanced way. So just be patient with yourself and let yourself kind of learn as you go. You're going to make mistakes. It's okay. As long as you address them and you're conscious of them and you make improvements on those mistakes, not only will they not continue, but you'll end up having a better relationship with the person with BPD, whether that be a friendship or intimate relationship. The next criteria is chronic feelings of emptiness. So this one's pretty self-explanatory. They just never feel really fully fulfilled. They don't have a strong satisfaction in their achievements, even if they've achieved great things. So, like, somebody with borderline personality disorder, they can be like a gold medalist Olympic athlete, and they'll just feel like they didn't do much with their lives, that they just, the accomplishments never quite they never quite reach the point of being satisfied with their accomplishments. It doesn't matter how prestigious those accomplishments might be. They could gain a PhD in a field. They could become the CEO of a large company that services like millions of Americans. It doesn't matter. Um, that feeling of emptiness like doesn't go away, like regardless of how many great things they do with their life. So imagining yourself and using empathy and imagining yourself in the borderline personality client's shoes, um, you can imagine how just uncomfortable that must be to feel that way. To never really be able to enjoy anything, to never really be able to um, look in the mirror and say, wow, like I've done a great job. Like I've accomplished my goals. Like I've done good. People with BPD just won't ever do that. They just don't feel it. Criteria number 8: inappropriate, intense anger or difficulty controlling anger. So, be prepared for angry outbursts if you're dealing with somebody who has BPD, especially if it's like a child and you're raising that child. um, they will be explosive. They will be confrontational. They will be manipulative. They will try to push you to your very last set of patience, and then they will try to go beyond that. And I like to tell people who are raising somebody with borderline personality disorder, your child will push you as far as you'll let them. So, you as a parent, you have to be assertive and enforce, strict rules and boundaries with somebody with borderline personality disorder. And a lot of times, it's important to gain their respect. And the way you do that is by being patient and working with them and not losing your temper, not getting frustrated, and not showing them, um, you know, those emotions and feelings. Of course, at times it's going to happen. We're all human. So, at times where you absolutely can't help it, it is what it is. But you want to try and be as consistent as possible with somebody with borderline personality disorder because they find security in that and they're more likely to comply. So it takes a lot of work, and what I mean by work, I mean like inside work for the caregiver to be able to take care of somebody who has borderline personality disorder. It's tough. Um, as a spouse, it's tough. As a friend, it's tough. Um, these are complex individuals with a complex illness. And there is really no set formula or easy way to navigate this illness. Um, but when you do make a mistake, you'll realize that you made a mistake because it'll be extremely challenging to cope with their reaction. Um, so, you know, you want to be very conscious of the behaviors of somebody with BPD, if you're in a parental role or a spousal role, and you want to be able to adapt as they're changing. Um, so, it's not for everybody, but if you can acquire the skill of adaptation and being able to adjust yourself to volatile changes in situations, you'll be able to do really well. It's just going to be very taxing and draining. And if you focus on self care and you do the best you can to replenish yourself and give yourself time to diffuse your own emotions and your own feelings that you get when things don't go good when dealing with a borderline personality disorder client, um, you'll be able to do some really, really great work with them or have a really good relationship with them, whether it be, intimate or otherwise. The next criteria is, and the last criteria is transient stress related paranoid ideation or severe dissociative symptoms. So when somebody disassociates, they almost lose consciousness. What they do is they kind of like, it's like you're talking and then your voice just starts to like fade out, and the person with borderline personality disorder, all of a sudden they can't hear anything that you're saying, and their mind is like totally like elsewhere, and they're kind of just staring into space, and that's when you know that they're going through a disassociative episode, when they've totally just lost track of what's even going on, and their mind has just traveled in their thoughts to a totally different realm where they can't even hear or feel what's going on in the present moment. Um, this usually happens when there's like a stressful occurrence or some type of stressful situation going on. It's a defense mechanism for the person with BPD to kind of just go off on into their mind and do their own thing so they don't have to deal with the emotions surrounding the stressful situation. It's not healthy to disassociate as often as somebody with BPD does, but like I said, it's a defense mechanism and it's automatic. It kind of just happens. Um, you don't want to just snap somebody out of that by saying, hey, are you paying attention to me? Or, "Oh, where's your head at? Or what are you doing? That could trigger like a very severe counter reaction from the person with BPD, and you'll end up in a screaming match with them or some type of conflict with them, and that won't be good. It won't be productive, or I'm sorry, it won't be constructive to have those types of conflict with the BPD individual. What you want to do is like when you see them disassociating, you kind of just want to be supportive, and then you want to approach them like in a really gentle manner, um, cautiously, carefully, with a very soothing voice, and you want to try to bring them back to center. So, you know, when I notice that people with borderline personality disorder are disassociating, I'll kind of say, I'll give them a second to kind of, stare out into space for a little bit. And then I'll say, hey, is everything okay? Are you all right? Did I say something that stressed you out or that caused you to, feel a certain way? Do you want to talk about that? Um, I'm here if you want to talk. If you don't want to talk about it, that's okay too. I just want to let you know I'm here and that I noticed you were disassociating, and if you want to talk about that, let me know. Otherwise, if you need a moment, I can give you a moment. That's not a big deal. Take some time. Um, you have to understand that the dissociative reaction is due to stress. So either they thought about something internally that triggered that dissociative episode, or you said something that triggered it, right? And now their mind is kind of off to the races in panic mode, trying to diffuse, the stress. And you don't want to contribute more stress to the situation by being confrontational or trying to snap them out of it. You can't just snap somebody out of those things. I mean, you can, but you're going to get a nasty reaction. And is that really what you want? I mean, that's not what I want. So, um, I just try to be as, you know, I just try to ease my way back into the conversation with them when I notice that's going on. So, the paranoid ideation is very short lived, and it's usually the result of like an argument, like where the person with BPD is starting to think, oh, like if it's with their dad, they say, oh, maybe my dad doesn't love me anymore. That's why he's arguing with me. Or, see, like I'm not the favorite. My sister is because look, dad's like picking fights with me right now and things aren't going well. Meanwhile, that's ridiculous. Like you guys just had an argument and it's going to pass and then everything's going to go back to normal. It's, nothing to stress about. But the person with BPD will stress about it and they'll think that it's way bigger than it is. and they'll build it up in their mind as like this huge thing to be paranoid about, and then they'll spend hours being paranoid about it until it's addressed. Um, so, knowing that, um, as a parent or as a spouse, you always want to be reassuring. You want to reassure the person with BPD that, hey, listen, it's going to be okay. This isn't the end of the world. We had an argument, we had a disagreement, these things happen. I just want you to know, like, you're still my main squeeze, or, I still love you as dad, and, don't sweat this. It's going to be fine. We can agree to disagree, and we can move on from it, and this isn't going to be a problem. So, having that reassuring attitude with somebody with BPD goes a really long way and helps to diffuse any paranoid ideation that they might be having. And like I said, with BPD, the paranoid ideation, which, what makes it different from other disorders, like a paranoid personality disorder or something like that, is it's much more short-lived, and it's usually just from intense emotion. So once the emotion diffuses, the paranoid ideation goes away. Um, so that's my bit on borderline personality disorder. I hope this was um, educational and helpful to those who are interested in this particular illness. Um, and that's it from me. So have a good night, everybody. Take care. Have a great night. And see you soon. Bye.